Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the Gospel of Matthew. We're in chapter 9. We're going to read verses 18 through 26. And this is the account of the raising of Jairus' daughter and the healing of the woman with the hemorrhage. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came and knelt before them, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus rose and followed him with the disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his garment, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. And was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, the girl is not dead but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went through all the district. This event is also recorded in in the Gospel of Mark, in Mark chapter 5, and in Luke chapter 8. Mark's Gospel is the longest account of this event. Mark's Gospel gives us more detail than we have in Matthew, although Matthew has some really interesting detail of his own. In Matthew's Gospel, it makes it sound like the man is asking Jesus to raise the dead, and of course before they get home, that's exactly what he's asking Jesus to do. But Mark makes it clear that at the beginning, he's asking him to come heal his daughter, and while they're on the way, someone brings him the message that his daughter has died. We know from Mark's Gospel this man is named Jairus, and he is a ruler of the synagogue in Capernaum. The synagogue in Capernaum, the ruins of that are still there. The floor is still there. The black basalt floor is still there, the floor upon which Jesus himself probably walked. One of the things that you can go and see and touch that Jesus saw as well. It was the second most important religious site in Palestine, of course, after the temple. It was in no way comparable to the temple, but it was a very important religious site, and it had a large staff, this great synagogue in Capernaum. And he evidently is like the archdeacon of the cathedral. I mean, he's the guy that's in charge of the facility itself. And he comes straight to Jesus. This would have been difficult for him to do professionally, but when it's your kid, it doesn't matter. And he says, my daughter needs you. You need your hand on her. Lay your hands on her, and she will live. We get more detail from Mark, perhaps because, again, Mark, his source is Peter. Peter, James, and John get to go into the room where it happens. They get to see what happens. Matthew did not. She's 12 years old, and of course there are crowds. And this starts when he is giving his answer to the students of John the Baptist. If they're still there in the crowd, they're going to get to see him raise the dead, which I think is very important too. I think that's an interesting bit of detail that we don't have in the other gospel writers. But what we know from all three gospel writers is that this is interrupted by a woman who has hemorrhaged continually for 12 years. This woman is unclean, period, biblically unclean. It is wrong for her, biblically, to push her way through this crowd just to touch probably the tassel of his prayer shawl. Observant Jewish men would wear kind of like a wrap, around their waist. They called it a prayer shawl. It wasn't worn around their shoulders all the time, but it would have 4 tassels on it. And if she could just touch one of the tassels, she would be healed. And she is. In Mark's Gospel, it tells us Jesus felt the power going out of him when it happened, which is a really interesting detail as well. And in all the accounts, Jesus calls her daughter, which is important because this man wants Jesus to come heal his daughter, to raise his daughter and they're having to stop on the way to take care of some other business. But Jesus' daughter, your faith has made you well. It's interesting that he honors her agency in this. It doesn't, clearly it's the power of Jesus that accomplishes it, but her agency is necessary for her rescue, for her salvation from this issue, because she had that kind of faith and acted upon it. They get to the house, and there's a commotion. And Matthew's the one who tells us there are flute players there, which is an interesting bit of detail. And flute players were often hired. I mean, that was standard. Professional mourners and flute players came to start to wail. And this is their job. It's what they're there to do. And both Mark and Matthew describe this crowd as not sufficiently respectful of the moment. They laugh at Jesus, and Matthew calls what they're doing a commotion. And Jesus puts everybody out and raises the girl, takes her by the hand, and she raises from the dead. This is the first resurrection account of the three that we have in the Gospels. Okay, well, that's what we have today. Thank you so much for joining me for another 5 good minutes. We're going to talk about 2 blind men who are going to be healed next time. Thank you for joining me. We'll pick up with verse 27 when we're together again.